Okay, welcome to the session, The Art of Crafting Meaningful Alt Text. If you're joining us online, please place your questions in the Q&A panel rather than the chat, as chat will not be moderated. For attendees in the room, please hold your questions until the end of the session. We'll try to get to as many as possible. If we don't get to them, some presenters will join the chat to try and answer questions individually. Our next presenter, Jeff Rodgers, is the Director of Digital Accessibility at Accessibility.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Wasn't sure. And an agency specializing in helping companies enhance the accessibility of their digital assets. He oversees the accessibility operations, which include accessibility audits, testing, and training for international and U.S. clients. Please join me in welcoming Jeff.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I can't really see everyone out there, but thank you for coming here, and I'm very happy to be back for another year here, being part of your Accessibility Day. And today we're going to be talking about crafting meaningful alt text. So you just heard a little bit about me and my background here at Accessiblue, but I also have spent over 20 years in higher education, first as a professor and then as an instructional designer and then accessibility specialist. So higher ed is something near and dear to my heart and something that I've done a lot with crafting alt text for educational purposes. So I know we're kind of limited on time, so I'm going to kind of go here fast to make sure we get enough time for questions. So a few things really quick. You're welcome to be sharing some of your alt text descriptions as we go through here. And if you could do that in the chat, that's great. You're also welcome to do that with those around you because, again, having some feedback is good. And again, we're going to have some Q&A time at the end. So first, some assumptions. I'm assuming that everybody here knows what alt text is. Understands why it's important, again, why it's incorrect or missing alt text would be a bad thing, and how alt text works with regards to assistive technology. And finally, a little factoid then, with screen readers, they can't have character limits for reading alt text. So we try to keep the alt text descriptions to around 180 characters or less. So if you have any questions about any of these, you're welcome to just type the number in the chat, and I'll talk about it really quick. But if everyone is okay with all of this, then we can kind of keep on moving. And I'll pause for a second here to see if the moderators have anything that's popping in the chat. I'm going to take silence as acceptance, so everything seems to be good. So good.
Nothing so far.
We will. What's that? Go ahead.
Nothing so far.
Okay, good. So everyone, I don't want to do anything or talk about stuff that everybody knows. So we want to keep on going through. So I'm going to assume those. So let's start crafting some meaningful alt text. So when we're dealing with alt text, the first thing we have to do is decide what needs alt text. And so what I like to do is a game called Meaningful or Decorative. And it's something that you can play at home or in the next time you're in a meeting that has a PowerPoint that probably should be an email. If you've been in those like I have, you can play these fun games. So Meaningful or Decorative. And so meaningful images are essentially those images that are important for sighted readers. So if you're going to have any images that are important for any readers that are on your page or web page, that's something that's going to need alt text and require a description. Decorative images, we may have heard of these and used these before, but these are basically images that if we removed it from the page, it would not detract from the message. It wouldn't take anything away from the information on the page. And if that's the case, then it doesn't require a description. So let's try this really quick. We'll go through here. So I have an image on the screen. It is the Arizona State University seal. It is red on a white background. And if you can, just type it in the chat or with your colleague next to you. Is this something that would be meaningful or decorative? And Mia, I guess I'll be relying on you.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Q&A panel if people want to put answers there because
Okay.
do not see anything in chat. Decorative, decorative,
Decorative.
decorative.
So this is something that would actually be meaningful, essentially because it's going to be something that's going to convey information or ownership, which since it's a seal. So this is something we would have alt text for. But what alt text? We'll talk about that here in a minute. Let's keep playing our game really quick. So here's something. So we have on the screen the word pentagon and a blue pentagon. So what do we think this might be? And if you're guessing decorative here, you would be correct. And so essentially we have something here that if I took the blue pentagon away from the page, there's still some text on it about a pentagon, so it may not actually take anything away from whatever the message is. So I know it's kind of a very basic way of kind of doing this, but just kind of giving you an idea of what some of the differences would be. So to review then really quick, a meaningful image would be anything that has any kind of purpose to sighted readers. Those could be logos, official seals, banners, nameplates, certainly photos, illustrations, maps, graphs, charts, those kinds of things, images of text, signatures, drawings, and of course, clickable graphics or anything that you would click on like a button. And last would be groups of images. So we're going to talk about some of these things here over the next few minutes, but that's just kind of giving you an idea of things that would be considered meaningful and should probably have some sort of alt text. And then decorative images, on the other hand, those are essentially, again, images that have no real purpose. And if we remove them from the page, if we remove them from, the document, would the mood of the page still be the same? Would the information on the page still be the same? Would all readers still be able to get all the things that they need to get from the text that's still remaining on the page? If that is the case, then it's probably decorative. So an example on the screen here, on the left, I actually have a blue box with the words decorative images in white. So the blue box is a graphic that I drew on here or put on the PowerPoint. And so it would require alt text, but I marked that as decorative because as a screen reader would hit this slide, it's going to read the title, which is decorative images, that text, and then it would say image, and then it would say whatever my alt text is. And so I really wouldn't want it to say decorative images and then read blue box and then go on and read the text on the page, which would be have no purpose. So that would be very confusing to someone using assistive technology because there's having the alt text for something that's not really meaningful on the page can add some more confusion. So that's a good reason why we would want to mark something as decorative because, taking that away really wouldn't detract any information. So anything that's usually colored boxes or shapes behind anything, separation lines, those kinds of things, we don't need to add alt text for those. And we certainly want to make sure that we're not going to be duplicating information that's on the page a lot. So in your alt text descriptions, we don't necessarily want to recreate things that we're already conveying on the page, because again, that could kind of be a little confusing. Really quick, I'm just going to talk about reused images. In my experience in academia, one of the questions I got asked a lot is, okay, I have an image that I'm using in my lesson in context and some sort of information for my students, but then I'm going to reuse that image later on, maybe in an assessment or in another part of a lesson. If that's the case, if the image is used in the same context, you could keep the same description. But if you're going to use it in a different context, then it could have a different description or require that. And so in some cases, you might have an image that you would have one type of basic description for, but in another context, you might need to provide additional information or details. So keep that in mind, especially if you're using any publisher content. Publisher provided PowerPoints tend to be very basic in their alt text, and they're not always going to match the intention that you're using it for in a particular lesson or part of your course. Next, step 2. So once you've decided that you need alt text, step 2 is here, and that is going to be context and purpose. So if you get anything out of this particular session, context, purpose are the key words. So the keys to meaningful alt text and the answer to life, the universe, and all things alt text. Context and purpose. So the context that the image is used in and the purpose it serves to all of your readers. So when you're looking at the image, you're wanting to think, okay, what's the context I'm using it in? And what is the purpose that it needs to provide? And in doing that, that should be your approach as you're crafting your alt text. So how would we do that? Well, we want to think about different aspects of the image. Something like, you might want to describe the dominant visuals. If there's some particular action in the image that you need to convey, you could do that. If there's some sort of story that needs to be told from the image, certainly if there's any text in the image, we usually want to make sure that's conveyed. And you can always do things like describing, who's in the image, what is happening. And I want to make sure that you understand that it is okay and acceptable to note the genders, race, ages, things like that in your alt text, because too many times people just say person, and that's not necessarily always conveying, and it's actually not really inclusive in some ways. So it is absolutely fine if you wanted to say, like the image on the screen would be a woman in her 20s who is Asian, and she appears to be blind because she is using a electronic braille device. So, something along the lines of that, because you're actually conveying what's in the image. And that would be something that all readers are getting. So there's no reason to eliminate that aspect in your descriptions for alt text. So a couple quick tips here as we get into some of the other aspects here. Just keeping your characters, your alt text to 180 characters or less. Avoid using or starting out with an image of or picture of. That's always assumed by the user of assistive technology. So a screen reader would typically announce image and then read the alt text. So you don't need it to say image, image of, and then your description. So that can be kind of redundant. Certainly we want to be concise. We don't need to be having any editorial content in there. Those are things that you can actually save and put in a caption for an image. And speaking of captions, we don't want to duplicate that in your alt text either. And it's always good to use sentence structure and punctuation and grammar, because we want to make sure that when it's read by a screen reader, it's going to make sense to the listener. So we're going to practice some of this and talk about the 7 different types of images. And we're going to go through a little quicker on some of this. If you want the slide deck, obviously it's available to you. There are notes from me in here in the slide deck, so you can get some of the information as well. So with this in images, the W3C, or World Wide Web Consortium, they've designated 7 types of images. They call them and refer to them as, number 1, eye candy, which is often confused with being decorative. So an eye candy is something that really is just there to enhance the page, set a mood, those sort of things. And so a lot of times those are mistakenly marked as decorative when there's actually a purpose that you're actually wanting to convey to your sighted readers. Functional images, things like a shopping cart or a submit button, obviously need to have information about what that is. Informational images, things like pictures that that's what we usually think of when we see image and we think of alt text. Next, complex images like charts and maps. Certainly images of text, groups of images, and then finally decorative images, what we've talked about. So let's see some examples. So here's an example of something that would be considered maybe eye candy. Basically, it's an icon. So we might have some other text on the page, but it's not really anything that it may have some sort of meaning to it. So we don't necessarily want to take it away. In this case, it looks like it's a tablet with a slash through it. So it's probably telling somebody that, or a smartphone, that not to be used for something. So there would be a purpose. So we want to make sure that that just is conveyed in the alt text. Functional images, an example, obviously submit, shopping cart, things like that. We want to make sure that the user knows what they're submitting. So it would be submit for a test, or if it's clicking on the shopping cart, that it's a link. It would say link to shopping cart, not just shopping cart. So again, the user knows where they're going and what that function should be that they would expect. Here's an image that we're going to try in here. So this would be considered an informational image. And we've got a screenshot of the ASU online homepage. And there's a lot of things happening here. So I'm always curious to hear what you might be thinking of for alt text. So you're welcome to put some of that in the Q&A chat. And I'd be happy to hear what some of that is. Because when we're looking at this, there's a lot of things that could be conveyed, and it can be confusing because there's text, there's a picture, there's also a screenshot. So there's a variety of different types of information that need to be conveyed. So we'd want to think about the context and purpose. So Mia, is there anything popping in the Q&A at all?
We do have one question.
Yes.
If you create a slide deck that uses a lot of images and decorative images, would you recommend creating another slide deck with the same information in a simpler style for folks?
If it has a lot of decorative images, I mean, you would mark that, so you wouldn't necessarily need to have something separate. You have to be careful creating something that would be separate, because if you do, you have to make sure that it's going to be available to all of your students. So you would certainly want to make sure that if you had something that you only, or you would not only offer it to some students. Obviously, we can't say, hey, if you're blind and you need something, let me know. That's not appropriate. We want to make sure that you're going to provide it to everyone and have that available to all students. So sometimes a text only available document that has that in there can be helpful, because a lot of students might actually use that and put it into a text-to-speech for their own. And I've seen a lot of students of mine who would like to listen to that. And so they actually convert it to an audio file and listen to it maybe when they're commuting to campus or something like that. So sometimes by doing that, you can have some benefits by providing a separate option that's basically text only. So that would be a good question. Hopefully I answered that.
Yeah, and that is all the questions for now.
Okay. So I've got some alt text that I put in here. And this alt text for this simply says, screenshot of the ASU online webpage, an image of an ASU graduate cheering, relevant text, same degree as campus students, 100,000 online graduates. So what I'm doing there is I'm stressing what it is that I want my readers to know. And so I'm setting the context of the page by saying that it's a screenshot of that online web page. And I'm also indicating the relative or the relevant text, because there's a lot of words that are in this image. And what I'm trying to highlight would be the same degree as campus students. And so that's one thing that you can do. And so if you're curious, though, the alt text that I used here is a total of 149 characters, including spaces. So you can kind of start to see how much you can and can't say in alt text. So here's another image I want to get to really quick. Complex images. That always has a lot of questions. So with a complex image, there's a couple of different ways that we can approach that, because there's a lot of different information. So in this case, we've got an infographic, and it's got a lot of information in the form of data that it's trying to present. So the ways that we can handle things like that is to leverage other aspects of the page. So example, you could put some of the information that you need your readers to learn in the text before or after the image. You can also leverage the caption so that you could put some information in the caption, because captions are available to everybody, both sighted and they're readable by assistive technology. So all of your learners are going to be able to have access to that information. So again, we don't want to duplicate information in alt text that's in the caption. So that's a good opportunity to have some additional information in there. And with an infographic, again, just like anything else, we're limited. So we really want to stress the information that we want our learners to get. So in this case, my alt text example is infographic about percentages of people with disabilities in the US. Essential text, disability is the only minority group that you can join. That is 19% of the population. So again, really it's just highlighting those important information that I need all of my readers to get from that. So I know we're really getting kind of low on time. And like I said, there's more information in the slide deck and that comes up with a variety of different other image examples, but I want to open it up to questions so that we can have that time.
We do have one question here. Do you
Yes.
ever describe the image as a photograph versus a graphic image? Is this helpful to include?
It can be. So I'm going to skip through something here. So I have something that talks about maps, but I'm going to go to like an image here. So this would be something like an image of or a photograph. In this case, it's a screenshot or a screen capture. So, you've got a photograph in there and you certainly just want to make sure that you're conveying. So if it's an illustration or in this case, if it's a specific type of picture, such as maybe something like a painting, again, you would start with that. You don't necessarily need to say picture of, because that's already assumed that it's going to be an image or a picture. So if there's something specific about the picture or a type of picture, you could indicate that. Hopefully that helps answer.
Okay, I don't see any additional questions here. Oh, here we go.
Good.
What about items in the forefront or background of the image? Also, what if the asset is a GIF?
Oh, okay. So we'll answer the first part of that. So if you've got background and foreground, you could say something briefly about the background or foreground, but typically it really depends on the context of what it is you need to have all of your learners grab from the image. So we get this a lot. We work with Foreign Policy News. So that's an online publication. They have a lot of images. So they have a lot of instances like this where you've got a lot of action going on. And so again, you can try to leverage in the article some of the information that you need to gather. So if you're describing a particular scene, whether it's from the battlefield or something that would have a lot of different context going on, highlighting the exact things that you need the readers to get. So it's not necessarily one versus the other, but you can say, background this and then foreground. So you can differentiate between the two in the alt text if you feel that that's appropriate to do. And then the other part of that, so if it's a GIF versus a JPEG, I mean, screen readers are pretty verbose, so they'll typically read and let the user know. I guess, are you asking about if it's a GIF as in like it's got a couple different moving parts of it? Is that the question as well?
They did not specify, but I
Okay.
think that might be what they were referring to.
So, again, if there's going to be a variety of different image parts of it, and that holds true if you have multiple images, is you can let the reader know that it's a, multiple image or a series of images. And that's how I would start it with series of images and then talk about that. So that's usually the best way to handle anytime you have multiple images or something that's going to cycle through a few different frames. So let the reader know that what's happening with it.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do you have any tips for when I am not the subject matter expert of a complex image?
So yeah, we really just have to try to figure out what it is that needs to be conveyed. And so if I go back to something like this, there's a lot of information there you don't really know. So if you can try to grab any of the context from what's being already put on the page, so then that you don't duplicate anything, that's always good. But otherwise, you kind of have to be somewhat vague and try to at least put out the information that you think needs to be obtained. So I know we're kind of running low on time here, right?
Yep, we are at time and it
Okay.
looks like we have no additional questions. So thank you so much, Jeff.
All right.
Um, we'll begin the next session here. It's ASU's Site Improved Platform demo in just a few minutes. You can join us here in the Ventana room at 10 p.m. U or virtually on Zoom. And thank you, everyone. We'll begin in just a moment. Thanks
Thank
again,
you.
Jeff.
Yes, thank you.